Karen scanned the first line, then the second, and her expression collapsed faster than wet cardboard. This can't be real," she stammered. "You forged this. Signed by the Department of Agriculture, ma'am," Grandpa said, tipping his hat. "That gate you're blocking? That's federal now, meaning your little parade's about 2 seconds away from a felony. Right on cue, a black pickup pulled up behind us. Out stepped a tall woman in a windbreaker that read U.S. Agriculture Enforcement Division. She introduced herself as Agent Ramirez and flashed her badge. "Got a report of unauthorized vehicles blocking a federal easement," she said. Karen froze like a deer under headlights. "Wait, there's no such division." Ramirez smiled. "There is this week. Washington likes to make exceptions for viral cases." Grandpa grinned, whispering to me. "Guess the internet finally did something useful." The agent walked around, snapping photos of the golf carts, the sign, and the freshly printed federal notice taped beside it. "You folks aware this area is under federal protection now?" she asked the HOA group. They mumbled. One man tried to explain something about community beautification rights, but Ramirez waved him silent. "Sir, this isn't a beauty pageant. It's an agricultural corridor," she turned to Grandpa. "Mr. Carson, thank you for reporting the obstruction. We'll handle the paperwork." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. This is harassment." Agent Ramirez slid her sunglasses on. "Ma'am, harassing federal property is a $5,000 fine." The silence that followed was worth framing. When the agent left, the HOA scurried off like cats after a sprinkler storm. Karen yelled something about lawsuits, but her voice cracked halfway through. Grandpa watched them go, chuckling under his breath. "You ever notice," he said, "how bullies get real polite once paperwork shows up?" That night, Grandpa sat on the porch while the sky bled orange. He wasn't smug, just quiet, thoughtful. "Boy," he said finally, "I didn't do this to win. I did it so folks remember. Out here we work the land. The land don't work for us." He looked at the glowing horizon. "They think progress means paving everything over. But sometimes progress is knowing when to stop." The next morning, the Channel 8 van arrived. Grandpa gave them coffee, told them the story start to finish, and ended with, "Don't mess with a rancher's gate." By evening, the segment had gone national. The title read, "The Rancher Who Outpapered the HOA." The internet crowned Grandpa a folk hero. Memes, merch, even a country song called Cattle Wire Justice. But fame has a funny way of drawing shadows, because while Grandpa was busy laughing at the memes, someone, or rather, some people, were plotting their comeback. A late-night email arrived from an anonymous address. "You think you've won, but federal can go both ways. Watch the gate." Grandpa stared at the screen, jaw tightening. "Well, boy," he said softly, "looks like they're fixing to make their last mistake." The final standoff at the ranch gate. By the time the sun rose over the ridge that next morning, the air already felt charged, like the land itself knew something was coming. Grandpa was on the porch in his flannel shirt and boots, watching the horizon, the way old soldiers watch a battlefield. I joined him with 2 mugs of coffee. "You think they'll really come back?" He didn't answer right away. He just squinted at the dust trail in the distance. "They ain't the type to lose quiet." Sure enough, a caravan appeared on the road, 3 shiny SUVs, 2 golf carts strapped to trailers, and a moving truck with Lakeview HOA operations stenciled on the side. At the front, naturally, was Karen, Bluetooth in one ear, fury in both eyes. They pulled up right to the gate, engines idling. The smell of perfume and paperwork filled the morning air. Karen stepped out, holding a thick folder. "Mr. Carson," she announced, "this is an injunction from the county. Effective immediately, all activity on this property must cease pending review of your so-called federal registration." Grandpa didn't move. "Pending review, huh? That just means they ain't read the fine print yet," she smiled, the kind of smile that hides knives. "Oh, we read it, and we brought help." The passenger door of the lead SUV opened, and out stepped a man in a dark suit with a silver badge clipped to his belt. The logo read, "U.S. Land Management Oversight Division." Grandpa muttered under his breath, "Well, they dug deep." The agent cleared his throat. Mr. Carson, I'm Agent Briggs. I'm here to ensure compliance with federal easement guidelines. Karen folded her arms, smug as ever. You see, federal. Just like you wanted. Grandpa looked at Briggs, then at the gate sign that still read Private Federal Agricultural Way. You here to take a look, or to take a side? Briggs hesitated. Just to inspect, sir, Grandpa nodded. Then you'd better bring your boots. It's muddy past the fence. The agent blinked. I didn't bring. Grandpa opened the gate himself and waved him through. Inspection don't mean much if you're afraid of dirt. I swear, I saw the faintest grin cross Briggs's face. He followed Grandpa in, clipboard ready. Karen tried to follow too, but Grandpa stopped her with a single glance. Federal personnel only, ma'am. You said it yourself. Her jaw dropped as the gate clicked shut behind them. For half an hour, I watched from the fence as Grandpa gave that agent a full tour. Livestock pens, irrigation pumps, the old windmill. Briggs took notes, asked questions, listened. At one point, Grandpa showed him the century-old deed framed in the barn office. When they finally came back, the agent's expression had changed. Less government, more human. Miss Karen, he said, stepping past the fence, this ranch meets every clause of the historic agricultural provision. In fact, I'm forwarding a recommendation for permanent federal easement protection. Karen's smile cracked. Permanent? Yes, ma'am. Congratulations, Mr. Carson. Grandpa tipped his hat. Much obliged, Karen sputtered. You can't just... This was supposed to... But Briggs was already climbing into his SUV. Ma'am, maybe next time read the map before you start a war. He drove off, leaving Karen and her convoy standing in the dust. That's when Grandpa turned to her. Now I could press charges for the trespass and obstruction. But I'm feeling generous, Karen glared. You think you've won? Grandpa smiled. No, ma'am. I just think you learned the boundary between a rule book and a fence line. Then, slow as a sermon, he hung a new sign beneath the old one. Visitors welcome. HOA not included. The crowd of neighbors who'd gathered at the roadside started laughing, phones out, filming everything. Karen realized she'd just starred in another viral clip, this time with federal confirmation on camera. She turned beet red, hissed something about legal counsel, and stormed off to her car. As the engines faded down the dirt road, Grandpa let out a long sigh and sat on the porch rail. Well, boy, he said, that's that. I asked him if he felt victorious. He chuckled. Victories for folks who had a choice. I just protected what was mine. That night, the sky was clear and the stars looked close enough to touch. The video of the final standoff hit 1 million views in 12 hours. People called it the day the HOA met its match. News anchors replayed Grandpa's one-liners. Memes of the visitors welcome HOA not included sign spread everywhere, but Grandpa didn't care about fame. He just cared that the gate stood open again, free and quiet. As we sat there watching the lights of fireflies over the pasture, he said, "You remember this, boy. A fence ain't to keep people out. It's to remind them where respect begins." I nodded. And somewhere out there, a coyote howled like it agreed. Next morning, Grandpa replaced his toothpick with a smile and said, "Now let's get back to ranching. Internet heroes don't feed cattle." And just like that, peace returned to the Carson Ranch, stronger, louder, and maybe a little more famous than before. The comments were wild. People called Grandpa a legend. Others begged for updates. And then, my favorite, someone from a news station reached out asking for an interview. Grandpa looked at the request, shrugged and said, "They can come if they bring pie." But that night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, I saw something shift in Grandpa's expression. He wasn't smiling anymore. "Boy," he said quietly, "you ever seen how far a Karen'll go when she's embarrassed?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He stared out at the dark ridge. "This ain't over. You humiliate someone like that, they come back meaner." And just like that, the peace we'd earned felt fragile again, because out there, beyond the fences and the wire and the quiet fields, the HOA wasn't done. They were just getting started. When the HOA struck back, a week went by after the golf cart incident, and for a moment, life felt normal again. The sun rose over the ridge, cattle grazed, and Grandpa went back to fixing fences and muttering about the price of hay. Then the letters started coming. At first, I thought they were junk mail, but the envelopes had official-looking stamps and bold red print. Notice of zoning violation, unauthorized. Structure on community-adjacent land. Mandatory compliance. Hearing. Grandpa stared at the first one for about 10 seconds before letting out a low whistle. They really went and printed paper lies, didn't they? Every morning after that, a new envelope arrived. They accused us of everything from improper water runoff to aesthetic disharmony. One even said our barn color violated community standards. Community standards? Grandpa said, holding the paper up to the light. We're 20 miles from their community. Only standard out here is, don't touch my cows. But it wasn't just letters. 2 days later, a drone appeared. It hovered above the ranch, blinking red like a nosy UFO. It flew low enough to spook the horses and make the chickens scatter. Grandpa looked up, eyes narrowing. They brought toys again, he muttered. He disappeared into the barn and came back out with his old 12-gauge shotgun, unloaded, of course, and a bright orange flare shell. Boom! The flare whizzed into the air and burst right next to the drone. The machine panicked, spun out, and crashed into the mud behind the troughs. Grandpa dusted his hands. Guess it didn't meet aviation standards either. That clip? Yeah, it went on TikTok. 2 million views by nightfall. People were calling Grandpa the HOA Terminator. But the HOA wasn't laughing. 3 days later, a black SUV rolled up our drive. Out stepped a man in a suit so sharp it could have cut barbed wire. He introduced himself as Mr. Leonard, legal representative of the Lakeview Community Homeowners Association. He adjusted his tie like he was allergic to fresh air. Mr. Carson, he said, we're here to discuss your non-compliance. Grandpa raised an eyebrow. Non-compliance with what? Common sense. Leonard ignored that. You're currently in violation of Section 4, Clause B, boundary obstruction. The association has voted to file for jurisdictional oversight. Grandpa chuckled. That's so. Last I checked, only thing with oversight here is my rooster. Leonard's smile was plastic. This isn't a joke, sir. You're interfering with a growing community project. Continued defiance could result in fines, seizure. That's when Grandpa stood up, slow, deliberate. Son, he said, I was here before your community was a cornfield. My family built this ranch when the nearest HOA was called the Wild Prairie. You think a clipboard and a bad haircut can scare me? Leonard cleared his throat. We'll see you in court. Looking forward to it, Grandpa said, tipping his hat. I'll bring cookies. As Leonard drove away, Grandpa turned to me, smirking. You know what happens when you poke a bull too long, boy? They get angry. He shook his head. They stop warning. That night, Grandpa made a few calls, not to lawyers, but to old rancher buddies. The kind who knew every inch of county law, every map, and every loophole that the city folks forgot. By morning, we had a plan. Turns out, our ranch sat on a historic cattle trail easement that granted free passage for agricultural use, and that same easement, legally speaking, classified the access road as agricultural infrastructure, not residential property, meaning the HOA's so-called expansion zone was legally invalid on our side of the fence. Grandpa filed a notice with the county office, complete with the original 1889 land deed. 2 days later, it was official. Our ranch and the surrounding area was recognized as protected agricultural heritage land. That meant no HOA, no zoning boards, no suburban empires could touch it. When Karen heard, she exploded online. Her HOA Facebook group lit up like a wildfire. She accused us of legal manipulation and environmental abuse. Someone even started a petition to revoke the ranch's protection status. Grandpa read it over breakfast, sipping his coffee. They really think hashtags beat history, but she wasn't done yet. That same afternoon, a county inspector showed up. Clipboard, reflective vest, nervous smile. Mr. Carson, he said, we got a report about, illegal livestock containment? Grandpa blinked. You mean the fence? The man nodded weakly. Apparently it doesn't meet the HOA's approved height standards. Grandpa laughed so hard he nearly dropped his mug. "Son, these fences were here before you were born. Only thing illegal here is wasting my time." The inspector scratched his neck. "Sir, I'm just doing my job." Grandpa's tone softened. "I know, son. You're just the messenger. But tell whoever sent you that if they keep poking this bear, they're going to find out what claws are for." He let the man leave in peace. Then quietly, Grandpa started building something new behind the barn. Wooden posts, metal signs, chains. "What's that for?" I asked. He smiled, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "Phase 2, he said. They wanted to play property games. Let's teach them how boundaries really work." By sundown, the sign was up at the gate. "Private Federal Agricultural Way, authorized entry only." Below it, a smaller one read, "Trespassers will be filmed for educational purposes." Karen's HOA wasn't ready for what came next, because Grandpa's next move wasn't just clever, it was legendary. Grandpa goes federal. You could feel the shift the moment Grandpa hammered that new sign into the dirt. It didn't just mark our land, it declared war in fancy lettering. "Private Federal Agricultural Way." Sounded official, didn't it? That was the point. For 2 whole days the ranch was quiet. No drones, no letters. No HOA cars creeping down the road. Just wind through the mesquite and the hum of cicadas. Then came the email. A reporter from Channel 8. News wanted to film a segment on the viral rancher who stood up to suburban overreach. Grandpa read it twice, then looked at me. "They want to see the sign," he said. "Guess we better make it real." Now here's what most folks didn't know. Grandpa wasn't bluffing. He'd spent those quiet evenings on his old laptop, digging through federal agriculture regulations, land use archives, and transport easement laws older than radio, somewhere between the dust-covered books and the government PDFs. He found it. A forgotten clause that let rural landowners register their primary livestock routes as federal agricultural access roads if they met historic trade conditions, and wouldn't you know it, our ranch sat on what used to be the Great Plains Cattle Run, a government-recognized route from 1891. So, Grandpa filled out the forms, mailed the notarized documents, and faxed copies to the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. 3 weeks later, a brown envelope arrived, stamped with an eagle seal. Inside was a letter confirming temporary federal review status for Carson Agricultural Route 17. Grandpa slapped it on the fridge like a kid's first report card. "Well," he said, "looks like the road's federal property now." I nearly choked. "You mean—" "That's right," he said. "Anyone blocking that gate now ain't trespassing on my land. They're obstructing a federal access route." Big difference. The timing couldn't have been sweeter. That same afternoon, the HOA rolled in again, this time with cameras of their own. Karen was back, sunglasses gleaming, voice pitched high with self-righteous fury. "I told you we'd be back," she shouted as her golf cart brigade lined up at the gate. "This land is under review, and we'll prove it's not exempt." Grandpa didn't even blink. He pulled the letter off the fridge, strolled out to the gate, and handed it to her. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you might want to read before you roll." The day the HOA came rolling in, it was supposed to be just another quiet Saturday morning on the ranch, dew still glistening on the fence posts, the horses kicking up soft dust as the sun peeked over the ridge. Grandpa was out front, coffee mug in one hand, chewing a toothpick like it was a lifelong rival, peaceful, simple, ours. That's when I heard the sound that ruined everything, a chorus of golf carts buzzing down our long dirt driveway like a swarm of angry mosquitoes. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the neighboring ranchers coming over for a visit. But then I saw the pink sun visors and the clipboard brigade, and I knew exactly who it was, the HOA from across the county line, and leading them, like some kind of suburban general, was Karen herself. She wasn't just any Karen. This one had a power stance, a loud Bluetooth headset, and the uncanny ability to make any situation about her community standards, even if that community was 20 miles away from us. They stopped right at our main gate, the only way in or out of our property, and lined their golf carts side by side, blocking it completely. Grandpa squinted. took a sip of his coffee and muttered, "Well, I'll be. The circus came early this year. I tried to keep things polite. Morning, folks," I called out. "Can I help you?" Karen raised her sunglasses, scanning me like she was checking a grocery list. "Yes," she said. "We're here to inspect the fence." "The fence?" I repeated. "Ma'am, this is private land." She nodded with that smug smile only HOA board members seem to have. "That's what we're here to discuss. You see, the lake community next door has been expanding, and this property falls within our future jurisdiction area." That was the moment I realized. She was trying to annex Grandpa's ranch. Grandpa just grinned. "Future jurisdiction, huh? Last I checked, this land's been ours since 1889. Only expansion happening here is the cornfield." Karen didn't laugh. None of them did. They started taking pictures of our barn, measuring our fence with little plastic rulers, and even snapping photos of our cattle like they were code violations. When Grandpa saw that, the toothpick nearly snapped between his teeth. "Boy," he said, "get me my hat." That hat, the old leather one with the cattle brand burned into the side, always meant trouble was about to start. Karen's guests were getting bolder by the minute. One of them even tried to open our gate to inspect the property line. When Grandpa told them to step back, Karen said loudly, "Sir, you're interfering with a lawful inspection." That's when I saw it. The old man's jaw set like stone. He didn't say another word, just turned and walked back toward the barn. Now, if you knew Grandpa, silence was never a good sign. He wasn't angry often, but when he was, he didn't yell. He planned a few minutes later. The HOA crew decided to park their golf carts right in front of our gate and wait for the sheriff. I guess they thought that would scare us. Grandpa came back carrying a roll of cattle wire, a pair of heavy gloves, and the calmest look I've ever seen. "Kid," he said, "grab the camera. If they want an inspection, let's give them one they won't forget." Before I could say a word, Grandpa walked right up to the gate, leaned against it, and said, "Ma'am, I'll give you all 5 minutes to move your toys off my land." Karen crossed her arms. "We're not moving until this gets resolved legally." Grandpa checked his watch. 4 minutes, she laughed. "Big mistake." "Sir, this isn't how the law works." He smiled. "No, ma'am. This is how ranch law works." When those 5 minutes passed, Grandpa didn't yell or threaten. He simply reached down, opened the emergency latch on the gate, and swung it wide open. The golf carts rolled back a bit from the movement, but they didn't move. Then, without a word, Grandpa walked behind the first cart, pulled out a length of cattle wire, and started looping it around the axle. Karen shrieked, "What are you doing?" Grandpa didn't answer. He just kept tying, calm, patient, meticulous. By the time she got out of her cart, half of them were already tied together, golf carts linked like chained cattle. The men in polos tried to untie it. But cattle wire isn't something you just undo with a manicure. Karen started yelling for someone to call 911. I looked at Grandpa, and he grinned. "Perfect," he said. "Let's get the law involved. I'd love to see how the sheriff feels about trespassers blocking a ranch gate." As Karen fumbled with her phone, Grandpa tipped his hat to her. "Next time you come onto a man's land," he said, "bring a permission slip, not a golf cart. The sheriff, the HOA, and the viral video. If there's one thing you learn growing up on a ranch, it's that nothing travels faster than small-town gossip, except maybe the speed of Karen dialing 911. And sure enough, 15 minutes later, we heard the wail of a siren crawling up the dirt road. Karen puffed up like she'd just summoned the cavalry. "There," she said, pointing dramatically at Grandpa. "That man's detaining us against our will." Grandpa didn't even look up. He was leaning against the fence post, still sipping the same mug of coffee like it hadn't cooled in half an hour. Calm, patient, dangerous. When the sheriff's cruiser came into view, I recognized it immediately. Sheriff Dale, an old family friend, who'd been coming to our Thanksgiving dinners since before I could walk. He stepped out, and resting on his belt, surveying the scene with a slow blink. The golf carts were tangled like spaghetti, and a half-dozen HOA members were pacing in circles, snapping photos and muttering about property rights. "Morning." "Joe," the sheriff said to Grandpa, voice steady, "Morning, Dale," Grandpa replied. "Fine day for nonsense, ain't it?" Karen stormed up before Dale could answer. "Officer, thank goodness. This man attacked our vehicles and is holding us hostage with wire." Dale raised an eyebrow, turning toward me. "Wire, huh?" I nodded. "Cattle wire, sir. The strong kind." Karen threw her hands up. "You admit it. He's violating," but the sheriff held up a hand. "Ma'am, before you start quoting the Constitution, I gotta ask, what exactly are y'all doing on Joe's land?" That stopped her for half a second. Then came the spin. "Well," she said, "we represent the Lakeview Homeowners Association. This property technically borders our upcoming development phase, and we needed to ensure the fencing and zoning align with HOA standards." The sheriff turned back toward Grandpa, face unreadable. "That true, Joe?" Grandpa gave a slow nod. "Sure is, except the part where they think my great-granddaddy's land is up for inspection. They parked their toy carts in front of my gate and blocked the road. Said they weren't moving." Dale sighed, like a man who's seen this movie one too many times. "Karen, you realize this is private property? You're trespassing." Karen gasped, like someone had just insulted her wine selection. "That's impossible. We have jurisdiction here," the sheriff chuckled. "Ma'am, your jurisdiction ends at the county line, and this ranch is 3 miles past it. You're lucky Joe didn't turn the sprinklers on." That made a few of the HOA guests whisper nervously. Grandpa grinned. "Thought about it." Karen's face went redder than a sunburned tomato. "This is harassment. He tied our vehicles up." Sheriff Dale looked at the wire, then back at Grandpa. "Joe, that true?" Grandpa shrugged. "Just secured them for their own safety. Didn't want anyone rolling off the road before the law arrived." Dale bit the inside of his cheek, clearly fighting a laugh. "Reckon that's considerate. Then he did something I didn't expect." He reached into his vest pocket, pulled out his phone, and snapped a photo. "Now that's something I'm going to show the boys back at the station." Karen gasped again. "You can't just take photos. We're the victims." But before she could rant any further, Grandpa nodded at me. "Kid," he said, "you still filming?" I lifted my phone. "Sure am. See, I'd been recording the whole time." From the moment the HOA started blocking the gate to when Grandpa calmly lassoed their carts with wire. The video had everything. Karen's voice screeching about community standards, Grandpa tipping his hat, and the sheriff trying not to laugh. Karen noticed and lunged toward me. "Delete that immediately." Grandpa stepped between us, his voice like gravel and thunder mixed together. "Touch my grandson, and you'll be explaining to the judge why you assaulted a minor on private land." She froze. Even the birds stopped chirping. The sheriff finally broke the silence. "All right, folks. Here's how this is going to go. You're all going to untangle your carts, drive back across the line, and not come back without written permission. Joe, you maybe don't tie anyone up next time." Grandpa tipped his hat. "No promises." Karen's group started trying to pull the wire loose, but that stuff wasn't coming off easy. Took them 30 minutes and a lot of cursing to get free. The sheriff watched the whole time, sipping coffee from Grandpa's thermos. When they finally drove off, leaving a trail of dust and bruised egos, Grandpa turned to me. "Boy," he said, "upload that video before they try to spin the story." I did, straight to YouTube, with the title, "HOA Invades My Grandpa's Ranch. He Teaches Them Ranch Law." By sunset, it had over 500,000 views.